Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another critical episode of economic reflection on our beloved channel. The financial world is once again buzzing with nervous energy, and no, it's not the aftershock of interest rate hikes or inflation fears this time. Canada is standing at the precipice of another potential trade war with the United States, thanks to, yes, you guessed it, Donald Trump. Now, Trump isn't a stranger to protectionist policies and tariff battles, as we learned all too well during his first tenure in the White House. It seems, however, that 2024 Trump is veering back to his old tactics with renewed vigor. After all, he's waving the infamous threat of 25% tariffs on all Canadian and Mexican imports into the US as leverage to get both countries to crack down on the flow of fentanyl and undocumented immigrants. Trump's approach? More tariffs. But this time, the consequences couldn't be more severe, disastrous even, for the Canadian economy. Let's peel back the layers of this burgeoning crisis and look at the economic complexities Trudeau must wrestle with, not only in dealing with Trump's extreme nationalism but also in safeguarding Canada's already fragile post-pandemic economy. Grab your coffee or, quite appropriately for today's discussion, a Canadian whiskey, because we are in for a deep dive. Let's start with some cold, hard numbers. The US is Canada's largest trading partner, with over 75% of Canada's exports heading across the southern border. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods ranging from automobiles, manufactured goods, food products, lumber, and of course, Canada's pride, its vast natural resources like oil and electricity. Now, picture a scenario where a sudden 25% tariff would be slapped onto the cost of exporting every Canadian product to the US. The shockwave that runs through Canada's export-dependent economy would be enough to cause a full-blown recession. First off, a key impact would be on manufacturing and automobile production, two of Canada's strongest sectors. Ontario, Canada's industrial heartland, would bear a significant blow. Canadian-produced cars, already under pressure due to competition from the US, Mexico, Europe, and Japan, would face a sudden 25% price hike in the US market, instantly reducing demand. The auto industry alone supports over 125,000 direct jobs in Canada, not to mention those downstream in services and part supply chains. Can we even begin to imagine the ripple effects? Layoffs, closures, and lost foreign investment would be the result. But it doesn't stop with cars. Aluminum and steel exports, industries Trudeau is all too familiar with from 2018's tariff standoff, would again be in the crosshairs. The US is the largest buyer of Canadian aluminum, importing over 80% of Canada's primary aluminum production. Atop that, there's the irony that much of that aluminum is imperative for US industries, especially if we consider Biden's push to electrify transportation with more electric vehicles. Talk about hurting your own supply chain. Now let's talk about another colossal economic giant, energy exports. Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity flow steadily south, fueling American industries and households year-round. Imposing a 25% tariff here would result in hugely increased energy prices for US businesses and consumers, further aggravating inflation, which remains a major concern in the US especially as Jerome Powell's Federal Reserve continues its battle against price hikes. For those of us who follow these developments closely, Trump's rhetoric feels like déjà vu. We've been here before. Remember 2018, when Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum under the guise of national security? Global markets trembled, and the Canadian government, led by Trudeau, had no choice but to retaliate with cleverly targeted tariffs. These weren't random products either, they were symbolically chosen to hit the heart of the US economy politically. As Trudeau himself pointed out recently, targets such as bourbon, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and Heinz ketchup were intentionally selected to cause pain for Trump's supporters. What resulted was a peculiar devise of how tariffs, far from being an abstract economic tool, can be used as a political weapon. The tariffs worked not just because they hurt profits but because they were designed to alienate Trump from his voter base. In Trump's populist ecosystem, where image and regional loyalty count above all else, Trudeau's retaliation was a masterstroke, even if painful for ordinary Americans. But here's the problem, folks, this isn't 2018 anymore. Back then, the retaliatory tariffs lasted less than a year before a resolution was hammered out in the newly negotiated USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the apparent successor to NAFTA. So why wouldn't Trudeau just rinse and repeat, right? Here's where things become more complex this time. This time around, Trump has been handed another opportunity to push hardline tactics, but his motivations and the American economic landscape have shifted. Back in 2018, Trump was still crafting his America First narrative, driving home protectionist measures to appeal to blue-collar workers in key states. But, fast forward to 2024, the global economy is reeling from post-pandemic recovery, we have unsustainable inflation trends, and China's assertive global economic positioning has thrown the supply chains into sharper focus. Add to this the fact that Trump's populism, climate change denialism, and, let's be clear, erratic diplomacy have become even more hardened. Canada, already squeezed between U.S. interests and its own national imperatives, is in a vulnerable spot. We have seen the end of low interest rates, widespread inflationary pressures, and an economy that has struggled to readjust in the wake of the pandemic. Politically, Trudeau's handling of the economic landscape has come under fire at home, with rising cost of living concerns, inflation, and overall economic insecurity plaguing the electorate. Now imagine throwing a so-called trade Armageddon into the mix. Tariffs like Trump's proposal would inject further uncertainty into an already precarious situation, and citizens and businesses alike would be scrambling. Moreover, trade relations exist in complicated interconnected ecosystems today. Stop for a moment and think about the possibility that, as the US and China continue their great geopolitical rivalry, American protectionism could drive more countries, including Canada, toward economic cooperation with China. In fact, it's a move we've already seen across many sectors globally as Washington's aggressive tactics have alienated potential allies. Canada is increasingly tempted by China's large market opportunities, despite the cool relations between Trudeau and Xi Jinping. Trudeau recently tried to inject a note of optimism, suggesting that a win-win solution might be possible for both the US and Canada. But if 2024's political posturing tells us anything, it's that, unfortunately, win-win solutions are more rhetoric than material reality in Trump's game. His chaotic tendencies serve as a deliberate strategy to destabilize trade partners, forcing them to offer concessions. Even the USMCA, which was meant to stabilize North American trade, now seems vulnerable to unraveling under the weight of unilateral tariffs and erratic US policies. Let's be honest, by suggesting we keep calm while preparing for war on the trade front, Trudeau knows that this next battle is likely to hurt not just the Canadian economy but the livelihoods of everyday Canadians more deeply than ever before. Already stretched thin by rising inflation at home, wage stagnation, and housing crises across major Canadian cities, the prospect of additional trade blowbacks will exacerbate wealth inequality and further intensify public discontent with the Trudeau administration's handling of the economy. Do not forget, supply chain disruptions and food costs are still gnawing away at North Americans' wallets, and cross-border tariffs only hike prices and jumpstart further import inflation. The result? A squeeze on household budgets, something ordinary Canadians and Americans alike can ill afford. So, what can we conclude from all this verbal battlefield we've laid out? In brief, Trudeau, facing aggressive posturing from across the border, must tread carefully as he seeks to defend Canadian economic interests without launching Canada into a downward spiral of retaliatory tariffs and escalating trade wars. But let's also look squarely at Trump's potential aims. He does this not just to protect American jobs but to sow uncertainty that leaves Canadian negotiators off balance, maximizing US advantage. Canada should pursue diplomacy, but also prepare to diversify its markets. Increased partnerships within Europe and Asia may help buffer the blow if the US once again becomes a difficult trade partner. However, it's clear, no matter how Canada responds, the looming unstable economic era of possible Trump-imposed tariffs will be nothing short of a minefield. Thank you for joining this deep dive. Stay tuned, because the coming months, as the US political stage sets new fires, will likely offer no shortage of dramatic economic developments, ones that Canada will need all its strategic insight and resilience to navigate.